I did not pee myself. I spilled tea on myself. And that's what you get for trying to drink tea while filming. It was a very regrettable incident, but I've recovered and I'm here to lend my lowly opinion to the great World Wide Web about thrift flippers. First of all, few things. Thrift flippers are awesome. I freaking love watching thrift flip accounts. Good ones. Good thrift flip accounts. I used to do this all the time. Like one year for New Year's, I made a dress out of a bed sheet, and it was entirely my own pattern that I just like cut out and made, and I was so proud of it, and it was amazing, and I wish I still had it because that would be fun to show on this video, but I don't. So yeah, I love thrift flipping, but there's a few things that I see these people making as mistakes, and obviously we all make mistakes. Like I made so many mistakes on that first dress. So many mistakes. So many things I would have wanted to change. But there's also some stuff that's kind of easy to learn and easy to incorporate into your sewing that doesn't take a lot of time and will make so much difference, you guys. Like I used to just be too lazy to do these things. Like I knew them, but I wouldn't do them. And the difference in my garments and my sewing since I've incorporated these things is incredible. All right, but first a few things. Number one is that my biggest pet peeve with thrift flippers is that they're often very petite, flat-chested girls. Now, the biggest issue with this is that they're like, hey, look, I made this cute top, and it's just a handkerchief with like some strings tied on, and you just sew around the edge and attach the strings, and voila, you have a top that you can wear all summer long. And it's like, girl, no. But if you have boobs or if you have any curves at all, like you're gonna need something that fits better, or else your boobies are gonna be hanging out, and ain't nobody want to see that. For someone like myself who's just a little bit on the bustier side, these things are even more important because like if I just tied a handkerchief around myself, like it would not turn out well. So that's my first biggest pet peeve. And my second is making garments that are actually just like single-use garments. And it seems that like the point of thrift flipping is often like, oh look, I'm being all sustainable and all of that. But if you don't have good construction techniques, it's not sustainable because you're going to have to throw that out in the end anyway. Nobody's going to want to wear it. You're not going to want to wear it because it'll fall apart the first time you wash it. And so that's kind of a big pet peeve of mine because I'm like, why make something if it's going to end up in the trash? I mean, I get that it's just fun, but also like if you like the clothes that you make, you will want to wear them multiple times, and then you can't if they fall apart. So 3 things. The first one is grain lines. Now, I'm going to explain this with a bit of visual aid. This is a piece of muslin, and you can see that this side here is ripped, and if I pull one thread, it comes out in one long piece, all along that edge, and that's how you know it's ripped along the grain line. All plain weave fabrics will rip along their grain lines. So if I make a little snip here, snippy snip, and rip, this is now straight of grain. Now there's so much to learn about this. It can be very complicated understanding about how things are woven and fabric and all of that. There's so much technology. But the very basic understanding is that when plain weave fabric is woven, there's 2 lines, each parallel to each other. So there's a vertical grain and a horizontal grain. And anything along these lines won't have any stretch, so you won't be able to stretch it at all. And I mean, sometimes the fabric will have a little bit of give, but that's different than stretch. So there won't be very much stretch or give or anything. If you fold it parallel to that, you're looking at something that's on the bias. So that does have some stretch and some give. So how can you apply this? The way that you can apply this to your sewing is when you're cutting pieces out, try to cut along the grain lines. So, or at least make sure that if you're cutting out two pieces or cutting something on the fold, that it is along the grain lines and that they have grain lines running in the same direction. So say you're cutting out a shirt, you want to make sure that when you fold it in half, it's along that grain line. So as you cut, the grain lines are even on both sides. Does that make sense? So if you're cutting out two pieces, and you cut out one along the grain line and then one kind of crooked because you're running out of fabric, they're gonna look different. And we don't want that. So the solution to that is to just plan out as you're cutting and make sure you're cutting along those lines or against those lines, but just make sure they're the same. Now it's okay to cut off the grain sometimes, like it's fine, whatever. I mean, a lot of ready-to-wear stuff isn't even cut perfectly on the grain lines. But there's a big difference between cutting on the bias and cutting on the grain lines. And you can see it right there, just in that stretch. And if you're following a pattern, make sure to line those arrows up with the grain line because it's even more important if you're following a pattern. Okay, my next thing. Number 2 on the list. Finishing seams. Okay, if you're watching a thrift flip video, and it's a tutorial, and they tell you you need fabric tape or fabric glue, run the other direction. I've never used either of these things, and I can't really see a scenario where I ever will. It repulses me. I can't even imagine. Like, I've seen things made with hot glue before and all sorts of just don't do it. Just stay away from the tape, stay away from the glue. My family's running around outside my room. Stay away from the tape, stay away from the glue. Just don't go there. It's so easy. You don't even need a good sewing machine. Like, I see people sewing on like kiddie sewing machines. Like, the sewing machine I had when I was 8 was like literally from a toy magazine. So if you can sew, like, I'd rather you sew on that than use tape or glue. It's the quality and how well it'll hold up is just so different. So yeah, sew with thread, real thread, and not tape. No tape. I don't want to see any tape. And when you're sewing, make sure that you're finishing off your seams. So if you're sewing with a knit, obviously this is a little bit different because knits don't tend to fray. They can fray if you have a really cheap knit, but most knits don't really fray. So I have definitely left knit edges raw before. I do have a serger. I use my serger sometimes, but also I love my serger and also it has issues. So, using a serger is great. Most people don't have one. So if you're finishing off seams, look at doing something like a French seam. I did one on this that I'm wearing right now, and you can see that it's completely enclosed. Another way to do it is finishing off your seams just with like pinking shears. So I don't know where mine are right now, but pinking shears just make like a zigzag along the edge of the fabric. And because if you understand grain lines, this might be too complicated to explain, but I'm going to try. If you have a piece of fabric straight of grain and you cut zigzag, 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 the threads are then interlocked with each other, so they're not able to fray as easily. They still can fray, but it's less likely to, and especially if you're not too hard on your garments, you can definitely get away with just a pink seam. Or if you have enough seam allowance, I mean, just fold it under and sew it. Just make sure that you don't have a raw edge that's just going to shred and shred and shred and shred and shred and shred and shred, because then your garment's just going to fall apart. So don't do that. Finish off your seams properly with any technique. I mean, just look up seam finishing techniques. There's like a billion of them. And your garments will look way more professional. I promise. One thing I don't recommend if you're trying to look professional though is zigzagging along the edge of the seam of the fabric. But I also just don't like zigzag stitch. I think it looks super unprofessional and I just like never use it. So that's just my personal opinion. All right, my third thing, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves because most of us, not all of us, but most of us have an iron at our house. And why aren't you using that iron? Like, seriously. Oh my gosh. Just run an iron over the fabric, for gosh, goodness gracious. Use an iron. Please, just do it. Iron your fabric before you sew. Iron your fabric while you're sewing. Iron down those seams. You know, just do it. Iron everything. Every step of the way, run an iron over it. It just makes it so much easier. Like, this makes your life easier. I know it's an extra step, but like, the difference is incredible. So stop sewing with wrinkly fabric. It looks bad. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Especially if you're posting it on YouTube. Don't do it. Iron the fabric. Oh my gosh. If you don't own an iron, that's one thing. If you don't have an ironing board, do what I did for years. Stick a towel on the floor and iron on that. Use an iron. Please. Thank you. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the 3 things that I see thrift flippers doing that need to change. And just as a reminder, number 1 is grain lines. Follow those grain lines. Number 2, finishing seams. Finish them. Number 3, iron your fabric. And seriously, the quality of the garments changes completely, and it's so worth it. I didn't used to do any of these things. Now I do them every single garment I make, and the difference is incredible. And the garments you turn out are high quality enough that if you decide you don't like them anymore, you can donate them to Goodwill, and Goodwill will take them and resell them. So it's like way more sustainable. Way more sustainable. Just do it. All right, so that's it for today. And let me know if you want another video like this one. There's so many things that I could say on this subject. And I made a video similar to this on TikTok, and it actually did really well, so that's why I'm making this video for YouTube. So yeah, follow me on TikTok, follow me on Instagram, subscribe to my channel, please. And if you have any other questions, drop them below and I can explain any of these topics further. This is just like a really brief overview of my personal opinion on this subject. So that's it, and I'll see y'all later. Bye!